Okay guys, this is slide 6 in the World War II unit. The U.S. advances in Europe. So let's get us into the fighting here. It all begins here, and things really sort of turn for the U.S. with the discovery of the Enigma. Right? This is the German code that the Germans were using to send messages between their high command and generals and so forth. The Enigma code, and the Allies managed to break it. So we were able to decode German messages almost as fast as the Germans were. Here on the slide you see this is an Enigma machine that allowed the, once it was invented of course, allowed the Allies to listen in basically to German messages. Okay? There's a good movie done about that called The Imitation Game, starring Benedict Cumberbatch. If you're interested in learning more about that, really good movie, well done. The U.S. will begin its fighting in the war in North Africa. If you'll recall, it was decided that the Germans were going to be dealt with first, and the first place we end up fighting is in North Africa. Now, a lot more of this will make more sense when I can explain it to you with the map there to show you some of these things. But basically, the Germans were led in fighting in North Africa by this man right here, whose name is General Erwin Rommel. Okay? And in my opinion, I think Rommel is certainly the best general on the German side, maybe the best general in the war, some would argue. But brilliant man, brilliant commander. And fighting in North Africa, as you can imagine, is desert warfare, desert fighting. Rommel was known as the Desert Fox because he was very sly, very cunning. The main goal for the of the fighting in North Africa was the Suez Canal. And again, this will make more sense when I show you on the map. But basically, the Suez Canal is extremely important to control, because if you control the Suez Canal, and Suez is S-U-E-Z, if you control the Suez Canal, you control shipping in the Mediterranean, from the Mediterranean east. Right? From the Suez, you can get from the Mediterranean into the Red Sea and then into the Indian Sea. Great Britain, it was very important for them to control it because they could get to their colonies in Australia and India without going all the way around Africa. Britain controls it, Germany wants it. So Germany has landed in North Africa with Rommel and is pushing east toward the Suez Canal in Egypt. Okay? It is at that point that the Americans arrive. Okay? The British are fighting from the Suez Canal toward the west. The Germans are coming toward the east. Rommel is fighting with British General Bernard Montgomery, who's known as Monty. But Montgomery, probably the best British general, good general, not great, but he's good, is basically fought to a standstill with Rommel. And then the Americans arrive. The Americans will arrive on the west coast of North Africa, in Morocco, and we will push toward the east. So now Rommel is caught between Americans to the west, led by General George Patton, P-A-T-T-O-N. Patton leads the Americans closing in from the west. Montgomery is pushing with the British from the east, and Rommel is caught in the middle. They will, then Germany will be forced to withdraw, and they will cross the Mediterranean in Italy, where Patton and Montgomery will chase them. They will follow them, and fighting will continue up the peninsula of Italy, up the boot of Italy, and turn into some of the most brutal, deadly, hard-fought campaigns in Europe during the war are in Italy. And fighting in Italy will go on really for another couple of years, till 1944 or so. So Italy proves very dangerous, very deadly. The Italians give up and surrender, but the Germans don't, and it's the Germans who are occupying Italy. So even though Italy switches, even though Italy surrenders, fighting in Italy continues because the Germans are the ones that are there. Now, while all this is going on, in late 1943, right, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin will all meet in Tehran. Right? Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin, so the leader of the United States, Britain, and the Soviet Union, the three big allies here, will all meet in Tehran. Tehran is the capital of Iran, and they will meet there to kind of coordinate Soviet attacks from the east with American and British attacks from the west. Right? And they will start to kind of plan out sort of the end of the war. Right? This is the first time that Roosevelt has met Stalin. Excuse me. So it's a pretty important meeting here in Tehran to coordinate Soviet and British and American attacks. Right? One of the things that they have to discuss is, when are the Americans going to open a second front in France? And that will be the discussion of what comes to be known as D-Day. D-Day is one of the most well-known, famous days during the war. It's called the Allied invasion of Europe. Really, we'd already invaded Europe. We were in Italy already fighting. It's really the Allied invasion of France. But it will occur on June 6th, 1944. Right? June 6, 1944. This is the largest amphibious attack. Amphibious simply means from water to land. The largest amphibious attack in world history. It will involve about 3 million Allied soldiers being landed in France, on the north coast of France at Normandy. It is planned and led by General Dwight Eisenhower. Eisenhower is named Supreme Commander of all Allied troops in Europe, which means he's in charge of all the Americans, all the British, all the French. There aren't many French still left fighting, but he's in charge of all those. And Eisenhower will plan D-Day. Okay? There was a huge misinformation campaign before the actual invasion, because one of the challenges was to convince the Germans that we weren't landing where we really were. We landed at Normandy, which was the furthest crossing from Great Britain. It's the least logical place. It meant boats had to stay in the English Channel longer, and they were vulnerable a lot longer. What we convinced the Germans of was, though, that we were going to land at a place called Calais. C-A-L-A-I-S. C-A-L-A-I-S. Calais, which is further up the French coast, the shortest possible crossing. We had put a huge amount of time and energy into convincing the Germans that the real landing was going to occur at Calais, and they bought it. It worked. Most of the German defenses were built around Calais, and as deadly as Normandy was, and it was really deadly, it could have been disastrous. Germany, and Hitler specifically, withheld many of their tanks, the bulk of their defenses, even once the landing started occurring at Normandy. Hitler was convinced that it was just a diversion. The real landings were still coming at Calais. So this big misinformation campaign that we ran ultimately saved the day at Normandy. Okay, once D-Day is a success, once we have landed and we have a beachhead and we're moving inland, the end of the war is sort of a foregone conclusion at that point. Germany is as good as defeated. It's just a question of time. So troops keep landing at Normandy, and they keep pushing further and further and further inland. Germany is pushed further back toward Germany. France is liberated, Paris is freed, and now it's just really a matter of time. The Russians are closing in on Germany from the east. The Americans and British are closing in on Germany from the west. And Germany puts all its resources into one final attack. It's known as the Battle of the Bulge. If you looked at the American lines stretched from the north coast of France to the south, the Germans hit the Americans one last time with everything they had right in the middle of their line, creating a bulge in the middle of the line. It's where it gets its name, the Battle of the Bulge. Occurs in the dead of winter, the last point you would expect the Germans to actually make an attack. It's one of the reasons it's so successful. And they're almost successful. They almost succeed. But they run out of fuel. They run out of resources. It's Germany's last final offensive, and it fails. Right? Now, in the middle of all this, once again, politics continues. We have another presidential election. We're up to 1944 now, and I guess the Democrats figured, well, we ran Roosevelt, for an unprecedented third time. Let's run him again for an unprecedented fourth time. So the Democrats will nominate Franklin Roosevelt for a fourth term. Much like when he won in 1940, the war is the big issue. In 1940, people figured they could trust Roosevelt. He got us through the Depression. He can get us through this war if we have to. And now, with the end so close in sight, they're going to stick with him. The Republicans are going to nominate a young New York governor named Thomas Dewey, D-E-W-E-Y. Thomas Dewey, D-E-W-E-Y. It'll be another huge electoral college victory for Roosevelt. But the really important part of this is the fact that who Roosevelt's vice president is, because he's going to come into play here shortly. Roosevelt's vice president will be a senator from Missouri named Harry Truman. T-R-U-M-A-N. Harry Truman. Vice president. Now, as the war draws to a close, the Allies discover the Holocaust that is going on. This was Hitler's final solution, he called it. The final solution to his Jewish problem. Concentration camps were set up throughout Germany and other conquered countries, mainly Poland. Jews, because they were blamed for the economic disaster that hit Germany after World War I, Jews were rounded up and sent to the concentration camps where they were mass murdered. Medical experiments were carried out on them. They were worked to death. Those that could work, those that couldn't, were gassed to death. 6 million Jews were killed in the concentration camps. 6 million. Who had committed no crime other than simply being Jewish. This was Hitler's final solution. When the camps were discovered, they were liberated as quickly as could be. Eisenhower himself toured the camps because he couldn't believe how bad the descriptions were. And he made all of the other leaders tour the camps so they could see for themselves just what Hitler had done. We'll talk more about the Holocaust in class. As the war draws to a close, Roosevelt, who had got the U.S. through it all, will not live to see the end, sadly. On April 12th, April 12, 1945, Franklin Roosevelt will die of a blood clot in the brain. He gets so close to the end of the war, less than a month from Germany surrendering, Roosevelt will die. Right? And Vice President Harry Truman will become President Harry Truman. Just a couple of weeks after that, Berlin is captured, right? And May 8, 1945, May 8, 1945 will be declared VE Day. Stands for Victory in Europe. VE Day. May 8, 1945. Hitler committed suicide in his underground bunker rather than be captured and put on trial. Germany surrenders on May 7, and VE Day is proclaimed. May 8, 1945.